morning my father was buried, my husband told me to get out. Not after the service, not after the reception, not after the last car pulled away from the cemetery. While the dirt was still being shoveled, while I was standing at the graveside in the black dress my mother-in-law had criticized that morning for being too fitted for a funeral, my husband leaned close to my ear and said quietly, so no one else could hear, "We need to talk when we get home, and you should probably start thinking about where you're going." I didn't cry at the grave. I didn't cry during the drive back. I sat in the passenger seat of a car I had helped pay for and watched the highway unspool in front of us and thought, this is the man I married. This is the person I chose. My father had been sick for 2 years. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you a lot of warning or a lot of time once it decides it's done with you. He and I weren't close the way some daughters and fathers are. He was quiet, a little formal, always smelled like coffee and motor oil. But he called me every Sunday without fail. And when he got sick, I drove the 4 hours to his house every other weekend until my husband started making it clear that the drives were an inconvenience, that I was neglecting our home, that my grief was starting to feel like a burden on our marriage. I stopped going as often. I will live with that for the rest of my life. My husband's name is Garrett. His mother is Loretta, and she lives 12 minutes from us in a house we helped furnish, and she has had an opinion about every decision I have made since the day I said yes to her son. The dress was too fitted. The way I loaded the dishwasher was inefficient. My career, I worked as a physical therapist at a small outpatient clinic, wasn't the kind of stable that Garrett needed in a partner, which I thought was rich coming from a man whose landscaping business ran on seasonal contracts and a lot of optimism. But I stayed. You know why women stay. The reasons are never simple, and they are never entirely about love either. But I stayed. So when we got home from the burial and Garrett sat me down at the kitchen table with Loretta already there, already seated, already with her hands folded like she'd been waiting a long time for this particular meeting, I was not entirely surprised. I was devastated, but not surprised. "This isn't working," Garrett said. Loretta said nothing. She didn't need to. Her being there said everything. "I need you to leave," he said. "You can take your clothes. The rest we'll sort out through lawyers." I remember noticing the casserole dish on the counter. Someone had brought it to the repast. It was still covered in foil and the corner had been peeled back and a fork rested on top of it. I remember thinking that whoever brought that casserole had no idea it was sitting in a kitchen where a woman was being evicted on the day of her father's funeral. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. My voice was very calm. I didn't plan for it to be calm. It just came out that way. "That's not my problem," Garrett said, and Loretta nodded, once, slowly, like an amen. I packed a bag, not a suitcase. I didn't have the presence of mind to pull out the suitcase from the hall closet. Just a canvas overnight bag with 2 changes of clothes, my toiletries, my phone charger, and, by reflex, I grabbed the small wooden box from the back of my closet shelf that I'd been carrying from apartment to apartment since I was 19 years old. My father gave it to me when I left for college. He pressed it into my hands at the front door the morning I drove away and said, "Don't open this until you really need to." I'd moved it 6 times across 3 cities and I had never opened it, not because I didn't want to. I'd held it probably 100 times, turned it over, run my thumb along the carved edge, but because I always told myself I hadn't needed to yet. I put the box in my bag. I walked out the front door. Garrett didn't follow me to the car. I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens 2 miles away and tried to figure out what to do next. My phone had 41% battery. My bank account had $340 in checking, and I knew without looking that savings had maybe $900. I had 2 friends I could call, real ones, the kind who would actually answer, but one was 8 months pregnant and the other had just moved across the country for a job. And I sat there turning the wooden box over in my lap and trying to figure out what my father meant when he said I'd know when I really needed it. I opened it. Inside was a folded index card. My father's handwriting, small and careful, the way he wrote everything. It had an address, a name, Mercer and Associates, LLC, and a single line beneath, "Tell them your name. They're expecting you." And underneath that, in different ink, like it was added later, "I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't explain this in person. You will understand soon." I stared at that card for a long time in the Walgreens parking lot with the engine off and the windows fogging up around me. Mercer and Associates. I searched it on my phone. A law firm. Not a big one. No splashy website. Just a plain page with an address in a part of downtown I'd driven past 100 times but never paid attention to, a phone number, and the names of 2 partners. I clicked the number. It rang 4 times and I was ready to hang up when someone answered. "Mercer and Associates. My name is Phoebe," I said. "Phoebe Donovan. My father passed away today and he left me a note with your address. He said to call you." There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A pause that felt like recognition. "Ms. Donovan," the woman said. "We'd been expecting your call. How soon can you come in?" The office was on the 4th floor of a building that had probably been impressive in 1987 and had since settled into the kind of dignified shabbiness that old law firms seemed to consider a personality trait. Leather chairs, worn soft at the arms. A secretary with reading glasses on a beaded chain who looked up when I walked in and said my name before I could introduce myself. "He described you," she said when she saw my face. "Your father. He said you'd have dark circles under your eyes and you'd be holding something wooden." I looked down at the box still in my hand. She stood and walked me to a conference room where a man in his 60s was waiting. Gray, at the temples, a burgundy tie, the kind of unhurried calm that I associated with people who had spent decades delivering news that changed things. "I'm Elliot Mercer," he said. "I worked with your father for 17 years. Please, sit down." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't offer condolences in that empty way people do when they don't know what else to say. He just folded his hands on the table and looked at me and said, "Your father was very specific about what he wanted you to know and when. He asked me to wait until he passed and until you came to us. Are you ready?" "I don't know," I said. "But yes." He slid a folder across the table. Not thick, maybe a dozen pages. The top sheet had my name on it and the date and the words, "Last Will and Testament of Thomas Arthur Donovan." "Your father's estate is more complex than you may be aware of," Elliot said. "He was a private man. He believed, correctly, that sharing certain information while he was alive would put you in a dangerous position." I looked up from the folder. "Dangerous how?" "Ms. How?" "Donovan, your father was a 34% equity partner in a logistics firm called Crestline Transport. He founded it with 2 other men in 2001. Over the past 2 years, while he was ill, the firm has been in acquisition negotiations with a national freight company. The deal is expected to close within 90 days. His stake alone." Elliot turned the folder to a page near the back and pointed to a number. I read it. I read it again. "That's..." My voice stopped working. $11.4 million, he said. "At the acquisition price. Before taxes and legal fees, yes, but that is the number." The room went very quiet. I was aware of the sound of my own breathing. "He never told me," I said. "He drove a 2009 Civic. He used coupons at the grocery store." "He was careful," Elliot said. "He was very careful, specifically because of your husband." I went still. "What do you mean?" Elliot opened a different folder, thicker. He laid it on the table and turned it so I could read. The first document was a letter my father had written to Elliot 3 years earlier. It began, "My son-in-law has been asking questions about my finances that a son-in-law has no business asking. I believe he has been speaking to my business partners without my knowledge. I want everything in place before anything happens to me. My daughter is not to know until it's time. If Garrett Whitmore or his mother are present when she learns about this, she will not be safe." I pressed my hand flat against the table because the room felt like it was tilting. "There's more," Elliot said quietly. There was more. The second set of documents were from a private investigator my father had hired 2 years before his diagnosis, so 5 years ago now. Garrett had approached one of my father's business partners at a charity golf event and told him he was concerned about my father's mental state, that the family was keeping an eye on things, and had asked, as casually as possible, whether there had been any recent changes to the company's ownership structure. My father's partner had told my father immediately. My father had said nothing to me. He hired the investigator instead and started building a paper record. The third document was the worst one. It was a series of text messages between Garrett and Loretta, subpoenaed during a brief civil proceeding that my father had quietly initiated 2 years ago. I read them slowly. My hands were not shaking yet. They were too numb to shake. Garrett, she's going to inherit whatever he has. I just need to make sure she signs over financial POA to me before it happens. Loretta, does she have any idea what he's worth? Garrett, no. She thinks he's broke. That's good for us. Keep it that way. Loretta, how long do we have? Garrett, doctors said maybe 2 years. Could be less. Loretta, then we need her isolated. From him. From anyone who might know something. I sat with those words for a long time. All those times Garrett had picked a fight the weekend I planned to visit my father. All the quiet comments about how I was codependent, how I needed to let him have his peace, how my father had his own life and I was smothering him. All those Sunday calls that I'd let go shorter and shorter because I was tired of coming home to a cold house and a husband who wouldn't look at me. That was strategy. That was deliberate. He knew, I said. My father knew they were doing this? Yes, Elliot said. And he couldn't tell me because he believed. And I agreed with him that if you knew, Garrett would find out. And if Garrett found out the acquisition was imminent, he would have moved to control your assets legally before your father could get his affairs in order. Your father spent the last 2 years making sure every piece of this was protected, every piece. In your name only, with restrictions that no spouse could touch without your direct consent and a court's approval. I thought about my father and his house 4 hours away, sick, getting sicker. Doing all of this quietly. Writing letters to a lawyer. Hiring investigators. Building walls around something to keep my husband out. And calling me every Sunday without telling me any of it, because he was trying to protect me, and the only way to protect me was to keep me in the dark. He left you something else, Elliot said. He slid a plain envelope across the table. My name on the front, in my father's handwriting. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I put it in my bag next to the wooden box, and I sat there in that conference room for a minute, just breathing. Elliot gave me the name of a family law attorney, a woman named Priya, sharp and methodical, who, when I called her that afternoon, answered on the second ring and said, Elliot told me to expect your call. Don't speak to your husband without me present. Not once. Not even to say you got my message. I got a room at a Marriott using the emergency credit card I'd kept in my own name, which Garrett had always called paranoid, and which now felt like the only smart thing I'd done in 6 years. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the envelope in my lap for a long time before I opened it. My father's handwriting. 3 pages. Both sides. Written in the last weeks of his life when his hands had started to shake, because the medication made them do that. Phoebe. It began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but mostly I'm sorry that I was quiet for so long. Your whole life, I thought staying quiet was keeping the peace. I know now that's not the same thing. He wrote about my mother, who left when I was 4, and about the years after, just the 2 of us in that small house, and how he had never been good at saying the things he felt out loud. He wrote about watching me marry Garrett, and having a feeling he couldn't name but couldn't shake. He wrote about the golf event, about the text messages his lawyer obtained, about the 2 years of being sick and furious and scared for me in a way he didn't know how to make me understand without blowing everything apart. He wrote, I needed you to still be in that house. I know that sounds wrong, but if he suspected you were about to leave him, he might have filed for some kind of claim before I could get everything secured. I needed you to stay a little longer. I needed time. I'm sorry that I used your patience against you, even to help you. I hope someday you understand. And then, near the end, you are the only thing I built that matters. Not the company, not the money. You. You survived your childhood and your marriage, and you did it with a kind of grace I never managed. Use what I left you to build a life that fits you, not one that fits someone else's idea of what you should be. I love you. I should have said it more. I held the letter for a long time in that hotel room. I called Priya the next morning. She was already working. She had already filed a protective order on the estate and a notice to Garrett's attorney that any attempt to claim marital interest in the inherited assets would be challenged under the specific provisions my father had established. Garrett's lawyer apparently went quiet for most of the day after receiving it, but Garrett didn't go quiet. He texted, "I know about the money. We need to talk." I forwarded it to Priya without responding. He called. I declined. Loretta sent a voicemail in her most wounded voice, talking about family and loyalty, and how she had always treated me like a daughter, and how this was not what any of them wanted. I sat in the hotel lobby. Priya had told me to stay in public spaces, to stay visible, and I listened to the voicemail twice and I thought about the texts. I think about them keeping me isolated. I thought about Garrett picking fights every time I tried to drive 4 hours to see my dying father. I deleted the voicemail. What I didn't expect was the car. 2 days after I moved into the hotel, I noticed a silver sedan that seemed to keep appearing in the parking lot. Same spot, different times of day, no one ever getting in or out. I mentioned it to Priya and she was quiet for a beat and then said, "Take a photo, don't approach it, I'll make some calls." The calls revealed that Garrett had hired someone, a former cop who ran a small investigation service out of a strip mall office on the north side. He was cataloging my movements. Priya said it in a very flat tone. "They're trying to build a narrative. If they can show you behaving erratically, spending recklessly, making unstable decisions, they can argue that you're unfit to manage the inheritance and petition for a conservatorship." "A conservatorship," I repeated. "It's exactly what your father was afraid of. It's why he built in every protection he did." The investigator was arrested a week later for tampering with my mail. He had apparently been intercepting hotel billing statements on Garrett's behalf, trying to document what I was spending and on what. He gave a full statement. He named Garrett. He named the instructions he had been given, in writing, about what to look for and what to report. Priya sent me the police report with a single line of commentary. "Good. Now we go on offense." There was a hearing. I want to tell you, it was cinematic and I walked in, and the judge immediately saw everything clearly. It wasn't like that. It was fluorescent lights and a lot of waiting and Garrett in a suit that Loretta had probably picked out, and their attorney making careful language out of ugly things. Words like concern and instability and the emotional toll of grief. Priya sat beside me and she had a binder that was 3 inches thick, and she didn't look concerned at all, which helped. She put in the texts between Garrett and Loretta, the ones about keeping me isolated, about waiting for my father to die. The opposing attorney tried to challenge the subpoena. The judge read the texts in silence. She put in the investigator's statement. She put in the intercepted mail documentation. She put in the letters my father had written to Elliot years earlier, the ones documenting Garrett's inquiries about the company, about ownership structure, about my father's mental state. Garrett's attorney made one more argument. The judge put up a hand. Petition denied. Restraining order granted. Temporary, but with immediate effect. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the steps in the cold, and Priya stood beside me, and neither of us said anything for a minute. "Is it over?" I asked. "This part is," she said. "The divorce will take a while, but the estate is protected. He can't touch it." I nodded. My hands had finally stopped shaking. I hadn't noticed when that happened. I had coffee that afternoon with Elliot at the office. He wanted to go over the acquisition timeline, the tax structure, the way the money would move once the deal closed. I understood maybe 60% of what he said. He was patient. He had apparently been patient with my father for 17 years and seemed prepared to extend that patience to me. Toward the end of the meeting, he said, "Your father asked me once, about 3 years ago, whether I thought this was the right thing to do, keeping it from you, building it all in secret." He paused. I told him I thought it was the only way given the circumstances. He said he hoped you'd forgive him. "There's nothing to forgive," I said, and I meant it. I have thought about it many times since. Whether I'm angry at him for keeping me in the dark, for the years of shorter Sunday calls, for letting me stay in a marriage he knew was a trap while he quietly built me a door. I have reached the same answer every time. He did what he could with what he had. He was a quiet man who showed love through action and couldn't put it into words until he was running out of time to say them. He built me $11 million worth of exits, and he wrote me 3 pages of apology in shaking handwriting, and I think that is, imperfectly and beautifully, the most my father knew how to give. I read the letter one more time last night. I've read it probably 20 times now. The pages are soft at the folds. The acquisition closed 6 weeks after the courthouse steps. I won't pretend the number landing in an account with my name on it wasn't surreal. It was surreal for about 2 days, and then it was just mine, and with it came the strange, uncomfortable weight of having to actually decide what I want. I had spent so long surviving inside other people's plans for me. Garrett's plan, Loretta's plan, the quiet plan my father had built around me without my knowing, that being handed the steering wheel felt enormous and a little terrifying. I bought a small house, not large, 2 bedrooms, a yard with a pear tree, a street where my neighbor walks her elderly beagle every morning at 7 and waves at me through the kitchen window. I furnished it slowly, 1 room at a time. I planted things in the yard that I have no idea how to grow, but which were on clearance at the garden center and seemed worth the attempt. Priya and I have a standing lunch every few weeks. She does not charge me for those lunches, and I have stopped arguing about it. The divorce finalized in the spring. Garrett got the car and some furniture, and nothing else. Loretta has not contacted me since the restraining order was lifted, and I have chosen to read that as the closest thing to an apology I will receive. There is a man who works at the title company that handled my house closing. His name is Theo, but that's not important, and we have had coffee twice and a dinner once, and I am not going to say more about it than that, because it is new and fragile, and I have learned to be careful with fragile things. What I will say is that the wooden box sits on my windowsill now, empty. The index card is in the letter with the 3 folded pages, tucked in the drawer of my nightstand. Every Sunday morning I make coffee and I sit in my kitchen that is mine, and I look out at the pear tree and I think, quietly, "I hear you, Dad. I understand now." I should have said it more too. If you've ever been the person standing in the parking lot wondering if you made a mistake trusting someone, I want to tell you that you weren't wrong to trust. You were just trusting the wrong person. The right people leave you proof of their love, even when they can't be there to say it out loud. Sometimes it just takes a little while to find where they hid it. Thank you for being here with me. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to stay with me too. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a mystical way. I don't mean the universe punishing Garrett or rewarding me for suffering quietly. I mean the plain, unglamorous version of it, that every choice a person makes sends something forward in time, and eventually that something lands. Garrett made choices. He chose to sit at a charity golf event and quietly ask questions about a dying man's finances. He chose to send those texts to his mother. He chose to pick fights every time I tried to drive 4 hours to sit with my father. He thought those choices were invisible. He thought careful cruelty left no evidence. What he didn't account for was a quiet man with a good lawyer, a paper trail, and 17 years of patience. My father made choices too. He chose not to tell me. For a long time, sitting in that hotel room with his letter in my hands, I turned that choice over and looked at every side of it. I could have been angry. Part of me was. But the more I sat with it, the more I understood that his silence wasn't indifference. It was the most calculated act of love he knew how to perform. He saw what I couldn't see from inside my own life. He understood that knowledge, in the wrong moment, becomes a weapon someone else can use against you. So he held it. He built walls around it. He waited, even while he was dying, because he believed the timing mattered more than his own need to tell me the truth. That's a kind of intelligence most people never develop. The restraint to know when saying nothing protects more than saying everything. I think about that a lot now, not just in terms of what he did for me, but as a way of moving through the world. There are things worth protecting by keeping quiet. There are also things worth protecting by speaking up. The wisdom is knowing which is which. What Priya showed me in her calm and methodical way is that integrity doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. She never raised her voice in that courtroom. She just put the truth on the table, document by document, and let it sit there. The texts. The investigator's statement. My father's letters. The truth didn't need her to argue for it. It only needed her to present it clearly. That's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like preparation. But I think that's what real courage usually looks like. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet, relentless kind that shows up organized and refuses to flinch. And then there's the part I'm still working on, the resilience piece. Because surviving something and actually rebuilding after it are two completely different things, and I don't think enough people talk about that gap. I survived the marriage. I survived the funeral and the parking lot and the hotel room and the courtroom, but rebuilding, deciding what I actually want, furnishing a house room by room, planting things in a yard I don't fully know how to tend, that part is slower and quieter and nobody applauds it. It just requires showing up every day and making one more small decision that belongs entirely to you. My father couldn't be here for that part, but he made sure I had the ground to stand on while I figured it out. That's what I carry forward. Not the money, not the victory in court, but the understanding that the people who truly love you spend their energy building your future even when you can't see what they're doing. And the people who don't, they spend their energy building their access to yours. The difference is always visible eventually. It just takes time to read it clearly.